Sorry, man. Today, the Lawrence family is about to save another planet from the dirty hands of the feds.
Finn. All right. I will choose to believe them. All right. So Star Ocean, Divine Force. More like Star Ocean, Divine Farce. More like Star Ocean, not a good game. This was painful. It honestly had a lot of promise. This was a game that started probably in the mid to high 80s in terms of how I would score an RPG. And its final score as it rests right now is a 65. I'm pretty set on that after the final dungeon boss rush and just the fact that the game did not wrap up in a very convincingly put together area or dungeon that I felt was cohesive. Let's start as to why I felt the game had a lot of promise. The pacing, at least at the very beginning, was very good. Raymond is not a particularly interesting character. However, his dynamic in terms of cutscene length at the very beginning was quite desirable. One of the biggest shortcomings of RPGs, at least JRPGs, is the need to over explain everything. And that usually results in multiple 30, plus minute cutscenes that people never shutting up, people being like, this, what's that? And then people going like, well, this is, and then just going a long explanation. That's what a JRPG is. And so with the plot of the game, you landing on a planet that's very primitive, I got scared pretty quickly because I'm like, that's what this game's going to be. But Raymond's so like a nonchalant, carefree, doesn't really care about anything, won't stop to explain anything, and that really worked. It made the cutscenes flow quick. You got to the action pretty quickly thereafter, but you still establish that we have some alien concepts and that we still have some things that haven't been, fully fleshed out yet. But we're not sitting down and overly explaining everything for 10 to 15 minutes. And there was a pretty healthy balance of gameplay in the overworld and going through and watching some cutscenes. I would say for about probably the first legitimate one third of the game, uh, I felt that the game had pretty okay pacing. It's the last two thirds where it fell off and became like every other JRPG, where it just over-explained concepts, over-explained Scorpium, just decided we need to have streams basically where I felt I accomplished nothing other than watching cutscene after cutscene. It felt like I was looking at disc two of Xenogears in certain areas. It was literally chase the story trigger from here to here, and then you need to go to this room. Nope, go back to the briefing room. Nope, go to bed. Like literally, with one stream, we went to bed with Raymond like four times just to advance the story, and I felt that that was just not very well constructed and nothing like what sucked me in at the beginning. I was pretty addicted, or at least I would have been had there not been the small text size, which is like 6 point font, and that really set the tone for how I approached the game. If the text is that comically small to where you can't read tutorials, you can't read basically anything, I at that point just really subconsciously don't take a game seriously anymore. I never really learned how to play the game properly in terms of how to set up perfect, appropriate combos, what certain equipments did, what certain crafting abilities did, just because it was so hard to get an idea of how any of these things worked. The VA attacks, I never understood how any of them worked. I know they were explained, but I couldn't read the tutorials, so I never learned how to do it. And the important thing about what sucked me into the world at the beginning as well is I felt the mode of transportation with traveling with Duma was interesting because I was expecting a Xenoblade type you run, you jump, you run, you jump, but you could fly. And at the beginning, they gave you interesting areas. They gave you ruins with rooftops. They gave you an area with multiple rocky crevices and mountains you could try to jump around to. But as the game progressed, the areas got considerably less interesting. You know, one area might have had like a floating continent or two, but there were a lot of hallways, a lot of areas that didn't really lead anywhere, and it was not as fun to explore the maps to find stuff as I was led to believe by first getting that taste of using Duma. And the fact that the game didn't really capitalize on it was very punishing and a disappointment. And the one thing I will say though is that I did find the ability to use Duma in that matter again to be refreshing. It was a good thing to be able to incorporate. It was fun to be able to try to utilize that. Um, the story itself started off strong also, but again got worse. Even though it started introducing all of these things, I felt there were a lot of plot points that I kind of felt died on sour notes. I liked the concept of the rod. I liked this whole conspiracy theory of individuals from a more advanced civilization infiltrating the society and setting forth all of these machinations. And even though it brought into existence Scorpium, which is probably a subplot within a subplot within a subplot, literally the subplot was breaking off into subplot factions, and I still felt like what happened on that planet was largely inconsequential. And considering that we landed on this planet and we were learning all about these kingdoms, it's kind of sad that the entire series of events on that planet was kind of rendered obsolete really towards the end there by the introduction of Scorpium. I felt such a detachment for the world. I felt such a detachment from the characters. I felt such a detachment from what we had done that entire journey up to that point. Once we went into the ship, the game really took a nosedive in terms of my interest. I no longer cared what was going on. I just wanted the story to be over because Aster 4 no longer really mattered. It just didn't. You know, we had some of the characters that were on it in our party, but I really lost that kind of connection and attachment. The fact that the game went and started to go back to traditional JRPG cutscene length, the fact that it did the worst possible job with implementing font, even worse than Xenoblade Chronicles X. At least with Xenoblade Chronicles X, you could pick up the Wii U gamepad and use that to possibly read the small text. Even though it's still small, you might have a better shot of the gamepad. Here, you have no choice but to look at the font on your TV, and there's nothing you can do about it. Plus the fact that it just didn't capitalize on making exploring interesting, and it was literally chase the cutscene, the game, for the last two-thirds of it. I would not recommend this game to anybody. It's unfortunate. Star Ocean was a very interesting game on the Super Famicom that I had the ability to play a translated ROM of. That's back whenever I was exploring all sorts of JRPGs on the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom. And so it's a shame that we're going to have to bid farewell to Star Ocean. Tri-Ace is in insolvency. This game sold worse than any other Star Ocean game in its opening week in Japan. This series has just not been saved, and this game is going to be the final note that it's going to end on. And I am afraid that the note was not a pleasant one. I wanted it to be. I felt very strongly about it going into it that this was going to be a game, despite the small text size, I felt it was a game that was going to really grip me and I was going to come around to it, despite the small text, and I just didn't. So a 65 it remains, and honestly, it probably could have gotten the 70 if it didn't have the small text problem. I would have left it at a 70. It would have still been in that okay range, but the small text is inexcusable. So was the final dungeon handling. The fact that they did the orb dungeon, which was really stupid. The fact that they decided they wanted to do a boss rush at the end, as well as implement a new dungeon, just to have the final form fought, and then you're doing just a rehash of everything else. I did not find that fun. I get why they did it because they're part of the Scorpion network, but I just don't. I wasn't moved by that. I was annoyed that I still had yet more gameplay to do, and it was just gameplay I had already done. Um, so yeah, Star Ocean, the Divine Force. Star Ocean 6, the final game in the series.